So that's really all about working with the Indonesian government, with other tuna NGOs, about capturing and understanding what are the social costs and benefits to working in fisheries. Challenges, there's sort of issues with the cost.
Okay.
So when it comes to any form of certification, there's going to be an issue of cost and capacity because they require a lot of information.
Yes.
That's difficult to say when there's sort of a cost of living crisis all over the world.
Yes, I can imagine.
So it's a very difficult message to sort of put as a blanket statement.
Yes. So what are the opportunities and challenges for Indonesian small-scale tuna fisheries to comply with provision of the social indicators in FIP?
So Indonesian...
Hi, back again with our podcast, Destructive Fishing Watch Indonesia, the podcast. We talk about ocean, migrant workers, and fisheries with me, Adeline. And we have a special guest today come to our office. Her name is Shannon Hardisty, right?
Yes.
So before we start, let me explain a little background about her. So Shannon Hardisty is Indonesia strategy lead for International Pole and Line Foundation. And she works as Indonesian strategy lead for IPNLF since July 2022. And then as Indonesia strategy manager, Shannon works with funders, IPNLF members, researchers, and most importantly, the YEE team to implement fishery improvement activities under the various grants while seeking out new opportunities and collaboration. That's why we work together. So it is pleasure to have you here in our podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
To our office and also our podcast. This is your first time to meeting with us in DFW before?
Yeah, first time to the DFW office and meeting the whole team in person. And it's been really great and been really productive and interesting to spend that time together.
So basically you based in?
So I'm based in Bali. But the YEE team is actually based all over Indonesia.
Yeah, of course.
So we have a team member in Jakarta, one in Makassar, one in Bitung, and one in Kendari.
There's a lot of people, in to work for YEE. So basically, what kind IPNLF promotes for sustainable in fisheries? Can you explain more about YEE?
Yeah, so YEE is a program within the International Pole and Line Foundation.
Okay.
And what we do is we work with tuna fishermen around the world that use 1x1 fishing gear. So that's pole and line, hand line, and troll line. And the reason it's called 1x1 fishing is because you use one hook, one line, one fish at a time, kind of thing. And the mission and vision for IPNLF and YEE is to have a sort of thriving ocean that benefits both the environment and the people who depend on it for their livelihoods.
Okay, nice. So basically you just joined IPNLF, right? And you've been working in Indonesia recently. So what are your observations regarding tuna fisheries in Indonesia, especially pole and line tuna, because YEE is work for in pole and line Indonesia, right? And which are our concern for IPNLF?
So it's been really interesting coming into the Indonesian space. Previously, I was working at the more sort of international level. So it's been very interesting hearing and learning about the complexities within Indonesia, which I think, just given its geography, creates quite a complex ecosystem to operate in. Some of the main work that we do as Ya'i'i focuses on improving access to market.
Okay.
So for the small-scale fisher, pole and line fishers, making sure that they have access to market through, say, quality improvements or traceability improvements.
Yes.
And we also work on some ecological issues like bait alternatives and making sure that it's sustainable. We've got a project just about to start on solar ice makers, which should be really interesting.
Yeah.
But then from a more social responsibility aspect, we have our work in social economic indicators.
Okay.
So that's really all about working with the Indonesian government, with other tuna NGOs, about capturing and understanding what are the social costs and benefits to working in fisheries. Particularly pole and line tuna fisheries.
Okay.
And then we've also got the sort of social responsibility, ensuring that fishers know that their rights and what a safe working condition is, things like that. And that's really where our partnership with JFWA comes into play.
Yeah, thank you for partnering with us, because we think it's good for the Indonesian migrant workers also who works, Indonesian fishermen who works, to understand what they risk when they work in the ocean, right? So, okay. We will go to the next question.
Okay.
But it's nice to have a discussion, the advancing how Ya'i'i advancing the pole and line industry, like solar ice maker, where the solar ice maker will be implemented.
So that's going to be implemented in Kawa, which is North Seram.
Oh, okay.
And we've actually, some of our team members have just come back from a field visit there.
Okay.
And it's a partnership with GIZ, an Indonesian engineer, and we're getting financial support through the Ocean Innovation Challenge.
Wow.
So
nice.
That's also a really interesting sort of aspect.
Yeah, because small scale in the fisheries dominate in Indonesian tuna fisheries, right? So they need a lot of innovation and helps to make the tuna still going. But from your perspective, what are the challenges faced by small scale tuna fisheries, especially pole and line, and how can business actor can help these small scale fishermen?
So it's a really interesting question. There are challenges that sometimes seem very ecological in nature, but actually link and have impacts on sort of livelihoods and lifestyles.
Yes.
One of the biggest challenges, and I think it's globally, but we are finding it here as well, is resource depletion. So the amount of fish that's actually available. And for pole and line fishers, one of those challenges is also the competition from other fishing gears.
Yes.
So because of the nature of one-by-one fishing, one fish at a time, it's quite labor intensive.
Okay.
Whereas other fishing gears might be able to catch hundreds or thousands of fish in one sort of set, if there's a net involved, for example. And then associated with some of those less selective fishing gears, they sometimes catch juvenile fish. So they're too young and they haven't been able to reproduce, which then means that there are fewer fish available. So it's that sort of vicious cycle that occurs. There's also the challenge of access to market and getting the recognition, especially for small scale fishers and pole and line. So whilst I think for Indonesia, it is a massive part of the export. And they are, I think, the second most sort of second largest exporter in the world.
Yeah.
I will be corrected on that. It's still making sure that they are recognized for the sustainable and the responsible methods that they use.
Okay.
So again, it's really unfortunate, but it comes down to that race to the bottom of how much fish can you get for the lowest price.
Yes.
And when it comes to one-by-one fishers, you're looking at slightly more expensive fish because it costs more. But then you know that you're not necessarily going to have the high levels of bycatch.
Yeah.
So other species that are caught accidentally. Generally, it's a lot more socially responsible.
Okay.
So that's those are some of the challenges.
Mm-hmm.
What businesses can do and the market can do is, ultimately, we want to say only source responsible one-by-one tuna. That's difficult to say when there's sort of a cost of living crisis all over the world.
Yes, I can imagine.
So it's a very difficult message to sort of put as a blanket statement.
Yes.
But what businesses can do and markets can do is invest in these sort of small scale or on the ground improvement programs.
Oh, yeah.
And part of it in Indonesia, one of the big challenges is lack of data around the amount of fish being caught, who catches it, and being able to represent Indonesia on the international scale to say, actually, we should be allocated this amount of tuna.
Okay.
So it all gets a bit complicated when it gets to the
the
international
data
stage.
Things, yes, because most of the Indonesian fisher is small scale.
Exactly.
So, the data.
So it's because of being small scale, the data and their contributions aren't necessarily captured.
Yeah.
And that leads to them being ignored potentially or missing out on opportunities. So if they can also be represented through the data, that's one aspect where we can really find some support and improvements. We also have, as IPNLF, the sort of global charity, we have lots of market members who then actually help invest in some of our on-the-ground improvements, such as helping support fair trade certification.
Yeah.
We have partners here in Indonesia who are actively investing in traceability technology that again contributes to the data capture, but also then for international retailers, they can say to their customers, we know that this piece of fish was caught in this exact geographic location at this time by this vessel.
Yeah.
And that's really also part of telling the story of the fisherman. So it's not just a can of tuna or a piece of fish that you put into the oven. It's actually, there's a person and a story behind it.
Yeah. Yeah, I ever heard about that. It's fish tails, some kind like that. So
so that's one.
Yeah, the
one
consumer know, okay, this fisher take my fish. So we give an acknowledge for the customers also who take the fish, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we talk about certification and everything. Then we know also about FIP.
Yeah.
Right. FIP. It's there are several indicators like environmental, social indicators, and everything. But we want to concise on social indicators because if we talk more about the social indicators, so we know that currently, including items that in FIP need to be met and scores, right? So what are the opportunities and challenges for Indonesian small-scale tuna fisheries to comply with provision of the social indicators in FIP.
So Indonesian fisheries have actually, especially the one-by-one fisheries, have been quite proactive within the FIP sort of program. Challenges, there's sort of issues with the cost. So when it comes to any form of certification, there's going to be an issue of cost and capacity because they require a lot of information.
Yes.
So actually having the people to capture that information and submit it, having that. And then when you have all the sort of assessments that go with it, that has a cost. And it's working out, where does that responsibility lie? Does it lie with the retailers, with the processors, with the fishers? You know, and scales of economy then. You can't really expect fishers to pay for these expensive certifications if they're being demanded by someone else. You know, that's not really fair. There's also, and it's a very exciting landscape, but one of the challenges is that social responsibility and labour rights is globally within seafood quite a rapidly changing landscape. So keeping up with it is challenging for everyone, but also I think in Indonesia, where we've got so many different communities and identities and cultures, then keeping up with what's also going on sort of on the international landscape, it's a lot to take in. And also, you know, a lot of these certifications have a very westernized point of view. Especially when it comes to sort of requirements for gender equality and stuff. So you've also got to look at how it impacts sort of social norms. But those are some of the challenges. Some of the benefits and opportunities that come with things like FIP, especially, is the opportunity for progress. It sort of really drives that improvement. And that transparency within the supply chain. And I think particularly with the social requirements for FIP, it also helps give a legitimate platform to discuss these issues. And really make it a point of importance to discuss labour and safe working conditions. And I think it was actually this morning I was reading a risk profile of fisheries in Indonesia. And they actually said one of the biggest challenges is so much of the information that concerns Indonesia is about either migrant fishers working in Indonesia or Indonesian fishers working overseas. So it's actually quite difficult to get an accurate picture of the experience of Indonesian fishers in Indonesia. And these FIP sort of programs and certifications do provide a really good opportunity to investigate that aspect of Indonesian fisheries. So that's a really a good positive there. And I think, ultimately there is a swing happening in the attention that's being paid finally to social responsibility and labour rights, and long may it last, really. For too long it's been ignored. And I will actually say the Indonesian government has been very supportive of our work with the socioeconomic indicators and wanting to get firmer database. So there's definitely recognition at least that we're feeling that this is an important way to go, and we just need to now maintain this momentum and actually hopefully deliver on it.
That's why the FWA and IPNLF, we have a MOU, right? Using National Fisher Center. For someone who doesn't know about NFC is a National Fisher Center. It's a platform for the fisher to giving their grievances or compliance to the some people, like maybe the mining agent or the government or the factory that owned by individual or a factory, a company, a company that working in Indonesia. So our last question, because we already have the collaboration, the FWA with YEE to train a fisherman in utilize fisherman compliant platform. So from your perspective, has the Indonesian fishery business ecosystem already provided the social protection to the fishermen, including access to compliance if there is a problem to their lives, or some kind like that? So what do you think? What your opinion for that part?
That's a really tricky question, because it's difficult. I can't necessarily talk for individual businesses, because most businesses and industry, there's a requirement to have some form of grievance mechanism.
Okay.
But what I will say is that there's a massive risk when it comes to these grievance mechanisms, that it's simply seen as a tick box exercise. So it's just a case of, well, we have to have this opportunity for individuals to complain.
Okay.
So they can submit something, whether we actually follow up on it, and have remediation, meaningful remediation, sort of stands to be seen. So I think what makes me really excited about this work with DFWA is that I think these are two organizations that really believe in making the impact and making the change and having the fishers' needs at the center of everything. It comes above the business and above everything else. It's their rights and their safety. So I think there's 100% there's a need for it within Indonesian fisheries, with all over the world, but definitely here. And there's also within companies, sometimes there are issues that you feel you can't report to the company themselves. So again, these national fisher centers play a really important role in giving opportunity for fishers to actually be heard, and to matter.
Okay.
So I think there's room for improvement in the business ecosystem, definitely, and there's a reason that there are all of these demands that are growing. They're not coming out of nowhere, and they're also they're not I'm trying to lost my train of thought there, but they're not coming out of nowhere. So there clearly is a demand and a need. And it's really good that light's being shed. But now I think through our MOU with DFWA, we really want to sort of focus on the solution and the impact. And I think that's the kind of work that DFWA and YEE can work on together. And part of that is also the education and the training aspects.
Hope the MOU and collaboration that we work to help Indonesian fisher for the better future.
Yes, Definitely.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much, Shannon, for come to our office and having in our podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
This is very nice because this is our second podcast who talk about migrant work and the social indicators and then workers and the fisheries things. Thank you very much for coming. We will meet you in the another time.
Oh, definitely.
Okay.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Okay, thank you very much for joining with us our conversation with Shannon Hardisty, Indonesian Strategy Lead for IPNLF, International Pole and Line Foundation. Hope this podcast give manfaat. How to say manfaat? Benefit for you guys. Thank you very much and bye-bye.